It takes you 15 minutes to go to the gym from your house because you can't go in a straight line. Now they build a bridge and it is going to take you 7 minutes. Are you going to take that? If you do, that's HIIT training. Except it's nothing new and it also doesn't work like that. Let me explain. I'm just going to go with some bullet points, otherwise I'm going to forget some things. But what is HIIT training? And I don't want to go into the history. It is just doing one exercise for one set in the 6 to 8 rep ranges all the way to failure and beyond with force reps, negatives and pre-exhaust or pre-exhaustion. And to go all the way to failure and beyond, you will need a partner. Otherwise, on certain lifts, you are just going to die. And it's pretty difficult to get a partner if you are like me and you have no friends. And I forgot to put it there, but you are only training 2 to 3 times per week. Sounds pretty low. Anyway, there is a lot to unpack here, so let's start at the beginning. One set per exercise is okay if you train with high frequency, as far as every day. But this principle is literally the opposite. It tells you to train as little as possible. And in the original HIIT training from Arthur, it says that one set for 20 reps. Now, Mike made a really smart move to reduce this down to 6 to 8 rep range. Now, why is it great? Because back in the days, they didn't have much data, but lower rep ranges are typically better for managing your fatigue. It's also easier to track your progression, and it is guaranteed that you can go to failure. Now about the failure and beyond part. It doesn't matter what your parents say. How far you are from failure matters. And it also matters what kind of rep ranges you are using. If you are using a higher rep range, let's say that 10 to 20, it is going to be way more important for you to go to failure. Opposed to if you are using a lower rep range, let's say 5 to 9 or 5 to 6, it is not going to be as important, but you still have to be like 1 rep shy of failure. And 3 to 6 sets per body part per week is neutral. It can work, but I would say 3 to 6 sets per training per muscle group is way more ideal. But these are just the principles, so let's look at the pros and cons, starting with the bad. No individualization. There are people who are way more sensitive to training because they have a higher percentage of fast twitch muscle fiber, and these fibers are typically more capable of growing, but they also have way less defensive mechanism against muscle damage and all kind of fatigue what's hindering your gains if it's present. And even though people like to say that, oh, but it is going to increase muscle protein synthesis and that's what you need for hypertrophy, yeah, that's true. But all of them are going to go to repair all the shit that you just caused, as in muscle damage. It's not for hypertrophy. And there are people who are not so responsive and resistant to fatigue, or at least way more resistant, and for them they need to do a little bit more work to stimulate those muscles. And guess what? You are not just one or the other, you are usually a mix. And to complicate things even more, within your body, your muscles are going to be different. Let's say that your biceps is a responder, but your chest is not so much. And to complicate this even more, even your muscles as in biceps, quads, glutes, they can be a mix as well, and they are typically a mix. So here we have to do some digging and experimentation just to figure out what works best for you. And now on to the training techniques. Isn't it funny how this whole approach is about managing your fatigue, yet these techniques are literally punching fatigue management in the face. And the first one is pre-exhaustion. And I know that I'm going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, and these are just facts, but pre-exhaustion is just not a good way to do things. The first exercise you are doing for a targeted muscle is going to get the best stimulus. Everything after that is going to get increasingly less. So if you do a pre-exhaustion, even though you are taking this to failure, let's say that in the example it's leg extension, superset leg press, they are both training your quads. So if you are doing leg extension as a pre-exhaustion method for your quads, since fatigue is going to be local in your quads, you're not going to get much out of your leg press. It is going to be mainly your glutes. Of course, it depends on your setup, structure, execution, and so on. So all you are doing is just creating way more fatigue. And the problem with negatives are a bit different, because depending on the exercise, you can cause a lot of muscle damage. And it usually takes your body around 2 to 3 days to clear it, or it can go all the way up to 5 to 7 days. So that's pretty long. Not to mention, whenever you are advanced or intermediate, you can't activate those muscle fibers, the highest threshold ones, with negatives. So once you go to the point where you can't do any concentrics, it doesn't make sense to do negatives, because all you are going to do is create fatigue, but you get nothing back in return. And it is not to say that you can't use this technique, but using this all the time just to increase your intensity just doesn't make sense. And the force reps are interesting because you are trying to stimulate your muscles to grow. But since fatigue is so much that your body is cutting you off from those motor units, if you can't use them, what are you going to stimulate? But definitely not them, because you don't have access to them. So what? So if you can't do something without any help from your partner or anybody, it doesn't worth doing it. And training 2 to 3 times per week is also not ideal. Not to mention it is going to limit the amount of split possibilities you have. And if you are intermediate or advanced, it is just not going to be enough, especially if you have a lagging body part like biceps, glutes, quads, calves, and so on. Anyway, let's see the pros. And the first one is set quality. And I feel like this is something what's missing from a lot of people's life. They don't treat the sets well. They think that, oh, if I have 4 to 6 sets, they're just going to grow muscle, even if I'm not doing anything or I'm just half-assing it without any effort. Like, how many times you heard that volume is the main driver of hypertrophy? And it is just not true. And I like that this approach is literally teaching you that you have one set, so you have to go all in. Otherwise, you're not going to grow. And fatigue management is funny because it is still a pro, because you're only training 2 to 3 times per week, but within your training session with all the intensifiers and techniques, you're messing everything up. But even then, you're still managing your fatigue. And the progression focus. It is pretty obvious that if you're not progressing in the gym, you're not growing. And if you only have one set, then you can make sure that after your warm-up sets, you are either getting one more rep or increasing the weight from session to session. And if you are progressing, you are growing. Technique focus. I say this all the time. If your technique or form is not on point, then your intensity doesn't mean anything. And if you have a really good form and your intensity is not on point, then it also doesn't mean anything. So you can't just do one without the other one. No junk volume. And this is good because a lot of people think that if you have 4 sets, 2 of them are going to be junk. But that's not true, because you can even do 4 sets and all of them can be junk. Or you can even do 1 set and all of them can be junk. If you are 5 reps, at least 5 reps away from failure, that's a junk set. You're not going to get anything from that. So it's not just overdoing the volume and then calling the excess amount junk, but it's also what you do within your session. And responders will blow the fuck up. If you're a responder and you've been doing high volume, you're not recovering and you're not progressing, then changing to this way, or at least this approach, is going to blow up your gains. But you can also make it better. Train more than 2 to 3 times per week. If you're a beginner, just thinking about going to the gym 2 to 3 times per week is going to give you some gains. But once you are intermediate to advanced, it doesn't happen. It has to be at least 4 to 6 days. Change your sets to set ranges. For example, whenever I'm doing my leg day, I'm only doing 2 sets of 5 exercises, because I know that I can progress on that and also manage my fatigue with that. Now, if I do more, then progression becomes kind of a pain. And if you know me, and you also know training, you know that deloading is literally a sign that your training program is bad. So I'm just trying to avoid that, because why would you grow from not training? You get the point, right? Also, it's an interesting point because you are going to grow when you are recovering, but clearly it shouldn't take you 7 days to recover. But for example, my chest and back, they can handle a bit more. So it is better if you experiment, individualize the training plan to you, because there's a chance that you don't just do 1 set, or 1 set is just not going to be enough. But for some exercises, it is going to be enough. Use techniques sparingly. It is fine if you are doing drop set or superset here and there, although at the right time with the right exercise combination. But if you are overusing it just because you lack effort, it is not going to get you far. Don't always go to failure. And this is funny because I don't actually mean that. I always go to failure on most of my lifts, but sometimes leaving one in the tank is fine. I'm not going to lie, I will never advise anybody to leave 2 in the tank because it's not going to be great. Especially if you are using higher rep ranges. If you leave 2 in the tank, it's just why are you even in the gym? And don't copy his workout because there's a chance that it is not going to work for you. I can tell it because I seen the training plan and it's lacking. And priority principle. If you want to grow something because it is lagging behind or you just want to grow it in general, that goes first. If your bicep sucks, that goes first. If your glutes suck, that goes first. If your height and your PP size sucks, well then you are fucked. Now look at this example training. If you are doing leg extension supersetting with leg press, this is going to be the pre-exhaustion. You are doing the leg extension to pre-exhaust your quads, and you go into another quad exercise, leg press. I mean, I'm assuming it is going to be a quad exercise. If you do this, you are just going to make things worse because local fatigue in your quads is going to be present. You are not giving it time to clear out. So you're just going to make your leg press that much worse. So just separate these two. You don't have to superset them. This is why I say that if you do it at the right time, with the right combination, it makes sense, but in this case, it doesn't. And this is the funniest thing. After that, there's a squat. If you did a leg press all the way to failure, you shouldn't be doing a squat because what are you going to train? Your quads, your glutes. It is probably going to be your quads, right? But it also depends on your anatomy, structure, and so on and so on. Leg curl is fine. Train your hamstring. But there comes a problem. Standing calf raise, and after that there is a calf press. I'm going to assume that your legs are straight on both. And if it is, then you are just doing the same exercise. So you could have done just one of them and give it 2 sets. Now this is not to say that the HIIT training doesn't work, but if we are only talking about HIIT training as in the Mike Mentzer style, it is definitely not going to be the best. It is a good base. You just have to make some changes and it's going to be great. But if you just steal the principles or the pros from it, you are going to be good. And not to mention, Mike was ahead of his time, but over time, he just went to the extreme. So that's why I just don't agree with the principles or how it turned out to be. But you can still use this. Anyway, let me know what you think. If you are using this training method or you're using your own one but incorporating some of the techniques, because I'm curious about your take. Talk to you in the next one.